Hi, everybody. Welcome to Sonic Yoga's Monday IG Live, being concerned with the roots of this ancient practice of yoga, which Lauren Hanna, the founder of Sonic Yoga, and I have been troubled recently, as I always say, by feeling like, we're not paying enough attention in the modern offerings of yoga necessarily to the roots of the practice and the entire impetus and reason for the practice to be in the first place. So, hello, just waving at all my friends here. So lately we decided we would get into the 8 limbs of classical yoga as expounded by Patanjali. And we've started with the yamas and the niyamas, of course, and these are the restraints and the observances. So the restraints are basically, you could confine those to, in layman's language, like those are bad behaviors. Those are things that you would want to stop doing if you're doing them now. Stuff like lying, cheating, stealing, things like that. Really obvious things, of course, but as we discussed in prior sessions, which you can still see on our reels, some of these things are happening in our lives and in our approach to the way we're living without us quite realizing it. So there's some things that can be looked at very carefully to our benefit. And as yogis, what we should be above all else is very mindful of our own behaviors and our own ways of moving through life. So then above the restraints or the modifications of bad behaviors, we go into elevating our behaviors to getting into really good behaviors. And that was discussed one behavior at a time over the last 5 weeks. So again, that's on our reels. So today we're here to talk about the limb that is above the yamas and the niyamas, the restraints and the observances, and that is asana. Asana means seat. Now, every yoga posture that you know of or have seen or heard of, that's an asana, that's a seat. So when I say asana, I'm simply talking about yoga poses. So yoga poses fit into this system that I'm describing, and they start to come into importance only after we take a really good look at our behaviors and dismiss the negative ones and elevate the ones that we're going to go forward moving through life with. Then we start thinking about doing yoga postures, which I think is very, very interesting, because the typical Western approach, which is the American approach, the Canadian approach that's become so popular, where we might think of yoga as only doing yoga poses. We would go to a group class and we would do yoga poses, and that's it. We've done yoga. We started doing yoga when the class began. We're doing yoga during the class, and then when the class ends, we're not doing yoga anymore. That's how, unfortunately, we tend to look at the yoga practice today in modern Western times, especially as yoga has become more and more popular. It's become more and more commercialized. So essentially, nearly everyone these days, if you were to look at percentages of people who practice yoga and who's practicing yoga at a gym or through a health club, overwhelmingly people are practicing yoga, in air quotes, at a gym or in a health club. And I don't mean to be entirely dismissive of that practice. People can certainly be doing worse things than that, so I'm delighted that people are practicing yoga poses and getting something out of it. I actually come from a Hatha yoga perspective, and from the Hatha yoga perspective, we would say that even if you're just doing the physical practice, you're actually able, through that commitment to the physical practice, to gain all the other benefits that I'm about to go into. So there's a lot of different ways of looking at this, but again, in this series currently, we're looking at the classical approach to yoga. In the classical approach to yoga, yoga poses are 1/8 of the practice, because there are 8 limbs. So asana, here we are. We're talking about yoga poses and why we're doing them. So it's interesting, to say the least, that when you look at the book that is going to explain by Patanjali himself the 8 limbs of classical yoga, if you're looking for references to yoga poses, you will find one, only one. It's a thick book. It's a dense book. Every sutra, every statement being made in this book is incredibly dense. And it's talking about the practice of yoga, how to practice yoga, and indeed why we're practicing yoga, what we're trying to get to. And it mentions yoga poses one time. Isn't that incredible? One time. And what it says, we might as well start here. What it says is that yoga postures should be practiced with steadiness and ease. That's it. That's all it says about yoga poses. There's a lot of reasons that I find that very, very interesting, but I think we can start with our sort of aggressive and competitive approach to yoga in the West. What we tend to want in the West is to do more and more complicated poses and to get leaner and leaner and more flexible and stronger, and also to, if I may say so, reveal more of our physical selves in being able to do these postures. And so it can become something that is more about the ego, more about sort of feeding self-confidence, but maybe in a surface manner. And certainly, this is not why we practice yoga poses. It just isn't. It just isn't. So, getting back to the statement though, yoga postures should be practiced with steadiness and ease. It doesn't say the easy yoga postures should be practiced with steadiness and ease. It says yoga postures, period, should be practiced with steadiness and ease. So what we tend to get a lot in a group class culture is this competitive spirit, where if you see someone else able to do a handstand or an arm balance or a very deep back bend that looks incredibly impressive, we're too often trying to force ourselves way too early into those poses. And so we're keeping our minds in the state that they're already usually in, which is this survival state, this competitive state, always looking to one up the other person so that we can benefit for obvious reasons. We're trained that way, especially in Western culture. So we're already in that mindset, and then we go practice yoga and we stay in that mindset, or we even get deeper into that mindset by being really competitive and comparing ourselves to others constantly. So this is a very damaging thing to do to ourselves, to our state of mind, and to our spirit. This is not why we're practicing the overall practice of yoga, and it's also not why we're practicing asana or the yoga postures. So why would the statement be made, let's just practice all postures with steadiness and ease? Why would that be? It's because really yoga postures are designed to help us get into the state. Yeah, blindfolded yoga. That's right. That's a good idea. So we're meant to be getting into a state of meditation through all yoga practices. Meditation. So what's really happening, or should be happening, when we practice yoga postures is that we are learning about the breath. We are learning about subtle energies in our body that can actually be felt, like visceral feelings are there that we can hone in on so we can better understand how really we operate. And in order to understand how we operate, we can really, I think, better look at yoga poses as a more and more difficult and complex obstacle course that we have to navigate. And the measure of whether or not we're navigating that obstacle course effectively and leading us toward meditation is how we're breathing. That's what it really is going to come down to. Because another thing that you will so often see, hello Cassie, another thing that you will so often see with yoga postures is that people are ostensibly getting into a given yoga posture, especially the challenging ones. And so if you were to take a snapshot of it, you might say, oh, okay, look, that person is in the yoga posture. Yay, that's very impressive. And yet, often, in order to assume that posture, the person is either breathing in a very short, shallow manner, and the body is filling with tension, or they're not breathing at all, and the body is even more quickly filling with just tension and strain. And so, as a visual, you could make, I think, a very weak argument that that person is doing a physical yoga posture formally. But really what they're doing is just a contortion of the body that has absolutely nothing to do with yoga whatsoever. Nothing. Because if it can't be practiced with steadiness and ease, you're not still practicing yoga. What you're doing is just basically an esoteric form of calisthenics. Nothing too wrong with doing calisthenics, of course, and nothing too wrong with it being based in something that is older. So perhaps you could argue that the postures have been worked out more thoroughly and therefore they'll be safer. But that's not necessarily true either, because a lot of the postures that we pay most attention to are actually, relatively speaking, modern. They're very modern inventions. And the impetus behind the inventions is often something that can be compared to a competition or even like party tricks, things that will impress others who really don't know anything. So in the long tradition of yoga, and yoga is thousands of years old, and that really is undeniable because of all the evidence we have through ancient texts that illustrate practices through words, but also through images. Yoga is thousands of years old. And in the long, long tradition of yoga, the concern is, am I able to get into a state of meditation? The answer is usually no, or I'm only rarely able to get into a state of meditation, or I'm only accidentally able to get into a state of meditation. Like sometimes it seems to work and I'm not really sure why. But usually when we get into areas where sometimes it works, but we're not sure why, that just might mean we're in a good mood, or things are going well enough that we feel relatively calm, so we're able to sit quietly and feel like, hey, I'm meditating. This is good for me because I'm quiet, But what usually happens is that people are very distracted and their mind is racing and their physical body is fidgeting. They have an itch that they can't resist scratching. Their hip gets numb, so they can't resist moving their leg and stuff like this. So physical postures are really designed for you and around you, you specifically. They're all designed to make you more pliable and stronger so that you can sit upright with your hips at an open angle position for reasons I'll get into in a moment, and that you can sit in that upright position with your hips open with really beautiful posture through the torso and the knees below the hips. You can sit like that in a place where you are unperturbed by the physical demands of sitting in that way, which are considerable. So are your shoulders open? Is your core really strong? Are your hips really open? That's essentially what it comes down to when we're looking at meditative postures. And that's very, very difficult to achieve. And it's one thing to achieve being able to get into that seat for a few moments, where you would then, of course, come right out of that seat into something else. But what if we said we wanted to get into that seat and remain for 10 minutes, 30 minutes, 60 minutes, 2 hours, half a day? It's possible. And as out there as it may sound, this is the ability that we're looking to achieve when we practice yoga in a traditional sense, meaning we're practicing the whole practice of yoga. In the West, it's turned into, can I do a handstand? In the East, it's, can you sit in a state of meditation? And can you be present? And yoga is from the East. So this is what the conversation should really be about if we're actually talking about yoga. What happens that we're trying to bring some light to, Lauren and I, is that people seem to love in the West to tell themselves and tell others that they're doing yoga. Whereas again, what they're really doing is just a slightly esoteric form of calisthenics. And if anything, they might actually be taking themselves through those practices further away from a state of yoga. So that's just it. Yoga is not an activity. Yoga is a state. Yoga practices are activities. Doing yoga poses, that's an activity. Doing yogic breath work, that's an activity. But the point of doing the activities is so that we can find ourselves in the state of yoga and then find ourselves being able to remain in that state of yoga longer and longer and longer, and then to be in that state of yoga even though we are outwardly appearing to do whatever our job is and interacting with our family and navigating through the city or whatever it is we're doing. We're always practicing yoga. This is what the practice should be leading us toward. This is actually why the over-reliance on group classes is problematic, because you're in a room with a bunch of other people and it's very difficult to not compare yourself to those people. It's also very difficult not to keep your eyes open and look at things around you and make judgments based on the things that you're seeing around you. So for a very, very long time, getting back to my point that I was starting to make 5 minutes ago, one would practice yoga alone for a very, very long time. You would do it daily on your own under the guidance of what used to be termed as a guru, but I think I'm more comfortable saying these days that would simply be a teacher. A teacher would guide you in how to practice. You would then go off and practice on your own for a little while. Then you would check in with the teacher again, and you would go off and practice some more, and then you would check in with the teacher again, and you'd practice some more. And yes, the practices would get more advanced as you went along. Certainly that's true. But the advancement of the practices would be a matter of like, let me set up again a more complex and intricate obstacle course and see if I can navigate that obstacle course while breathing in this very deep, fluid manner. Because if you can do that, what it really is guiding you toward is remaining still for longer and longer periods of time. And we start with the body. We want the body to be still. We want the body to be absolutely still in this elevated posture where, though you're seated, you have really beautiful posture from the crown of the head all the way through the tailbone, and your hips are open. Because that is a position that's conducive to several things being possible. Energy spooling up in the pelvic bowl and moving faster and faster and faster in a circular fashion until it starts to push up through the line of energy that is most grossly represented by the spine. So in the pelvic bowl, we have this dormant energy that we call Kundalini energy. It resides in all of us, but it's at rest. We want to start to agitate that energy and get it to move up what is essentially the spine. But the subtle body term for it is a line of energy known as the Sushumna Nadi. This is simply the central channel of subtle energy in your body. And we have all heard of chakras, right? We've all heard of chakras: the heart chakra, the throat chakra, the third eye chakra, the crown chakra, the root chakra. Well, all of these chakras, these centers of energy in the body, they lie along this line from the root through the navel, through the heart, through the throat, through the third eye, through the crown of the head. And we want energy spooling up in this fashion in the pelvic bowl until it starts to push upward and move up in that direction. So it's just a matter of it eventually happening, and we are allowing for it to happen. But in order to allow for that to happen, what we first have to do is manipulate the body in ways that will make the body more pliable and stronger, and that's very, very challenging, but it serves meditation. It doesn't serve you taking pictures of yourself and posting them on Instagram, right? Because that's been around for like 6 seconds in terms of the whole span of yoga and why we're doing yoga in the first place. So it's about meditation. Now, the other circumstance in which people would practice yoga postures traditionally from the Eastern tradition for a very, 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 very long time before it ever arrived in the West is in an ashram setting. But in the setting of an ashram, yes, it's a group setting, but everybody has made an immense commitment to be in that group setting. They've actually renounced not only any means of making a living, but they've also renounced their family and friends, which of course is a very extreme thing to do. But the point is that in order to practice in a way that's still conducive to elevating our energies and getting ourselves into the state of meditation in a group setting, that kind of commitment was a precursor to that approach. So the more sustainable approach for a householder is to practice yoga on one's own every day, ideally in the morning. So as a yoga teacher who teaches group classes, am I arguing that you should no longer go to group classes? I'm certainly not arguing that. You should go to group classes because the practice has to evolve. The practice has evolved, and that's wonderful. And the way that it's evolved in the West is to put a much brighter spin on it. It's evolved in the West to make it convenient for people to take some kind of approach to it, which is great. So we should take advantage of that. We should take advantage of group classes that are available, and we should attend them and try our best in those group classes. Regardless of who the teacher is, we should just go to those classes and do our best. But the way that we can really do our best is not just through an intense physical effort. It's much more about your intention. What's your intention when you're doing this practice? Is your intention to look better and better and better? Nothing wrong with that. It's just that there's a fine line that's very easy to cross where you slip into becoming very egotistical as your body gets more and more developed and you start to feel better and elevated physically, and you will. We can't let that sort of devolve into feeling like we are superior over other people around us, or that we are objects to be admired, and that's kind of what feeds us and makes us happy. That's a very dangerous area to get into, when what makes us happy is positive feedback from people just kind of looking at us, whether they're looking at our bodies or whether they're looking at us in a tricky pose. If that's where we get our self-esteem from, this is very, very, very problematic, actually, right? So when we are practicing in a group setting in a studio, if our intention is as clear and elevated as we can make it, that will create a condition where your practice moves very, very, very rapidly into this state of feeling like you are more and more connected to universal consciousness. Or you could flip that around entirely and say the state is being more and more connected to your most high, authentic self. There's an argument in yoga philosophy that those are the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. Connection to universal consciousness, connection to your most authentic self. The more you know yourself, the more connected you are to God, if you are willing to frame it that way. But if you're not willing to frame it that way, it's fine, because we can call it consciousness. Whew, that was a mouthful. But here's the thing. People are clearly very interested in yoga. Yoga has exploded in popularity, going back to very early in the 20th century in the West. And that's nothing but a wonderful thing. We can't let ourselves get down on how it's been commercialized. It's been commercialized, but those forces that commercialize things will always be out there. We can't let that bring us down. We should look at the news as all good. People are curious about yoga. Why is that? Let's take the gym example again, or the health club example, or the Peloton example if you're doing it from home. You're still gravitating toward a yoga class versus kickboxing or body sculpting or whatever it is. And I would argue that if that's happening, if you're interested in yoga, there's a very deep, elemental reason that you're interested in yoga, even if you have no idea what it is. And even if what you really want from yoga is just to look better and feel better. Again, that's obviously a really good thing. There's certainly not a thing wrong with that. But even if that's kind of where you're at with it, like, I just like yoga, I think it'll make me feel good, you're still choosing it over so many other things that you could be choosing. And to me, that interest in yoga, however nebulous it is, there's a seed there of something incredibly important. And that the important thing for me is that you're a seeker. You're looking for something deeper. You're looking to understand yourself. You're looking to understand all things around you. That's really why you're interested in yoga more than you're interested in spinning or rock climbing or kickboxing or whatever it is. There's a reason. And the reason is you are seeking something. That instinct that you're seeking something should be honored in a way that you know, at the highest level that you could think of yourself honoring anything, you should honor that. And so that when you unroll your mat and when you turn on, you know, your computer to do a virtual offering, or when you head to a gym or a health club or a yoga studio to take a yoga class, if you remember why you're there, that you are seeking understanding, every down dog you do, every warrior two that you do will take on an entirely different and much deeper meaning. And how do we bring it all together? How does the rubber meet the road, if you will? Just please do this for me. Sit quietly. Sit in absolute silence each day for at least 5 minutes or something like that. And I would highly recommend you try not to set a timer. Instead, do it when you have some time to do it. Do it when something's not coming up literally 5 minutes into the future. See if you can get through 5 minutes. Look at the time before you start, and then look at the time when you finally decide you just can't do it any longer and you have to start moving and you have to open your eyes or whatever it is. Try that, because that is the measure of how advanced your practice is. It's not about the handstand or the arm balance or the super deeply impressive visually back bend. It's, can you sit in stillness and be truly present? And the thing is, we could define that, but I think actually only you can define that for yourself, and you should expect much of yourself. So if you're wondering, well, what would it mean to be present? What do you mean? Well, why don't you answer that? You answer that, because you're capable of it, and also you're going to come up with the best answer that's available. Every teacher I've run across in 15 years of practicing yoga who I would consider a real teacher, every question that I had as a student or every question they addressed that a student had, they would always put the question back in the lap of the student. The student wants to know, what does it mean to be present? How do I become present? The teacher would always say, any real teacher would always say, you answer that. You go away and you sit quietly and you answer that. So if you're going to sit down and try to meditate and you find that you're immediately fidgeting, you're so distracted and you need an app to rely on, you need someone to guide you through meditation, take that as a measure of your practice. It's not that advanced at this point. It just isn't. Take it as a challenge if you want to. Decide that you are going to see what the measure of your physical practice really is, where you really stand. And that is stillness and silence. Stillness in the body is where we start. What it leads to is stillness in the mind. All right? So remember that. So when you're in a long warrior two or you're in a pose that's hurting your hips because your hips are really tight, remember that. Find stillness in the body first. Figure out how to do it. The answer, I'll give you a clue, is always through your breath. Figure out how to make the posture easier and more steady through your breath. When you start looking at the poses that way, every pose is an advanced pose. Downward facing dog is advanced. Warrior two is advanced. Padmasana, lotus pose, it is advanced. They're all advanced. They're all difficult if you look at it that way. And that's that's an intense feeling to look at it that way, to look at things as being on that serious of a level. But we're talking about you. We're talking about you taking yourself seriously. Rather than taking everyone else seriously and serving everyone else, take yourself seriously and answer these questions for yourself through practicing yoga postures. Yay, we're done. Thank you so much. Thank you. If you have any questions, you know where to find me. You can just send me a DM on Instagram. I'm at the Keith Partington. I'll tag myself in this. This is Sonic Yoga's IG Live, obviously, and this will be on Sonic Yoga's Reels if you want to replay it or tell your friends to look at it, and then we can really get something going, I think, because this is always about community. This is always about recognizing that each of us is a seeker, so we have an affinity for each other already, so we can have an amazing conversation. So if you want to open one up, never hesitate. I'm always here for that, okay? My name is Keith. Lauren will be back with me next week, I think, but we'll keep this going regardless. Just going forward, we'll always be here for you and on Reels. Thank you. Bye, everybody.